All right, so this video will cover the grad school process, and I think a lot of it is known, but I'll just add in little bits of commentary here. Um, so as I mentioned in previous video, starting in your sixth semester, so your second semester junior year, this is really where you're making that decision on whether or not you're going to grad school or getting a job. This video is geared more towards the people who decide that they definitely want to go to grad school. If you're on the fence and you still want to look into it, these are some of the steps that you'd have to take. It's still worth looking into the information because even if you decide not to, you could, learn a little bit more about it, see yourself in it, and you're like, oh, well, I wasn't as unsure as I thought I was. So more information is definitely better. So, starting in that sixth semester, you want to start educating yourself on the research fields because remember, a graduate school degree, particularly a PhD, is marrying you to research. You're saying that this is where I want to be, and your graduate school experience, especially when getting the PhD, is more of a research apprenticeship than anything else. So you want to start educating yourself on a particular field. You can start with broad strokes, whether or not you want to be in organic, inorganic, analytic, I'm sure other broad fields, physical chemistry. I'm sure other broad fields that I'm neglecting to bring up. For chemical engineering, I think the choice starts initially is whether you want to be computational or experimental, and then branching out from there. There's a whole lot of different options, and I'm not even going to start to get into the particulars on how to tell them apart and find out where you specifically need to be because this is on a case-to-case basis. So I highly urge you to get in touch with Trinity professors, your own professors. Like they could be your research advisors, but even others in different fields, and ask them about the state of their field, what's being researched. If you're interested in academics, it's like what is more academically viable right now. If you're interested in getting a job, what have you noticed is more of an industrial interest, and this is something that you can pick up on while doing your own networking just with industry people. But as I mentioned before, for the upperclassmen networking, this is the semester where you're going to start reading up on these fields and potentially start contacting professors at other universities running their own research programs to basically interview them and ask them about the landscape of their own research. Earlier on, can probably be covered in email where you're asking for the information, but it gets more and more specific as you start narrowing those options down. Can't go wrong with a good review paper as well. So in the summer before your senior year, this is where a bulk of the preparation takes place. So you're going to start by taking the GRE. And most professors will tell you that the GRE isn't all that important. It's a rough proxy for your quality of candidate, but it's one way that they can compare all candidates against each other. I agree it's not the most important thing in the world. You probably don't have to enroll in a summer course, but get your hands on a couple of practice tests. This could be either through, say, one of those $40 prep books, or use a friends if they have it available to them, just so you get an idea of your time constraints and how you're going to have to manage your time, and what kind of questions that are asked during the test itself. Now remember, this is an adaptive test, so the questions you get earlier on harm you more than the questions that you may miss later, so you want to get as many of those earlier questions correct as possible. The quantitative section is going to be way more valuable for STEM majors. I haven't yet to meet with anybody who has any say in graduate school admissions who even cares about the verbal section or the written section. It doesn't mean you should totally bomb it. Definitely take the practice exam, but I wouldn't take the 6 months to a year of vocab building that you'd really need to do for the verbal section. The most important parts of your application, on the other hand, are also done during the summer. That is when you start drafting and writing your personal statement, and this is where you are collecting your letters of recommendation. Now, you don't need to have the letters specifically written during the summer, but this is where you think about which professors you want writing for you, and when you formally ask them to write for you. The way it's done nowadays is you usually apply to a position, you supply their emails, and then they'll get an automatic email where they get to upload their letter, and you're disconnected from the entire process. In the old days, I had to collect letters that had their signature on the seal of the letter, so they knew that it wasn't opened. But I don't think I think it's all digital now. So those two collectively are the most important, because your personal statement's the only time that you yourself get to make the case for yourself, and the letters of recommendation are the professors especially the ones that you have worked for and can speak to your research knowledge. Otherwise, if you're able to get enough research done during the summer that you can put this together into a paper, or at least contribute to a paper that's already been written, that is also fantastic for your application. Particularly if you're first author in the paper, that is the absolute holy grail. Because when graduate schools are reading these, reading your letters of recommendation, reading your personal statement, they're trying to figure out how much time they need to put into you to make you productive in their labs. And the less time that they have to put in, the better a deal it is for them. So at the same time during the summer, you're making your long list of universities. You've narrowed down the rough field that you want to be in. You're talking to some professors, and so you have a longer list of universities that have research that interests you and professorial research that interests you. And again, you should be cross-checking this list with, say, the professors, maybe even the postdocs around if they're knowledgeable of it. So this takes you through the end of the summer. In September to about early October, or I should say August through early October in your senior year, you're going to narrow that long list down to a short list. And the short list is going to contain your safety schools, your normal goal schools, and your reach schools. So if you're looking for a good number of places to apply, I would say 6. And I know there are ways to waive the application fees, but you're going to have to check with each of the individual schools on a way to do that. It can become pretty expensive. But yeah, that you would narrow down your school list, and this is the time where you're also doing the final editing of your personal statement and getting all your documentation together, and then figuring out for each of the schools that you're applying, which have slightly different standards of applications than others. Like some may ask for different things in their personal statements, or some may ask for 5 letters of recommendation instead of 3. I don't know, but you're actually going to go through and figure out what each individual school needs. And then probably in mid-October through late November, early December, this is when you're actually submitting your applications. And compared to everything else before this, the submission's the easy part, because this is where you're just collecting the pieces and hitting send. It's also the most nerve-wracking part, because you've been building up to this for months, and you're thinking, oh man, my future's on the line. So make sure that you're still doing well during the semester with your classes. Senioritis is likely set in on this point, and once you have completed this application process, you're probably thinking, okay, well, I'm in the clear, it's out of my hands. It's like, no, you still have to finish strong. So I urge you to do that. So in the early winter, I'm not sure when early acceptances came in, because I personally didn't apply for those, and I was applying over 10 years ago. So I'm not sure when those acceptances and rejections will come in, but I know a lot of schools will cut off their application process in the middle of January to late February, and they tend to send out their acceptances and at least their rejections within a month of that. Again, if there's some early acceptance or early admissions for some schools, you'll have to, they'll tell you, but I'm not sure when exactly you'll hear back from that. But regardless, you'll have a list of acceptances and rejections at this point. So once you've been accepted, make sure that you visit all of the schools that have accepted you, unless one of those is a safety school that you don't really want to attend. Let's say that it's far away and you've already been accepted to, say, schools that you like and a reach school, so you don't really need a safety school. I still give it another pass just to be certain, but I think that'd be the only exception. Otherwise, you're going to visit all the schools. You want to personally meet with all the research advisors that you think are interesting, and you want to be in regular email contact with them. For each of the schools, you want to make sure that there is enough going on that you're going to have a favorite professor, but maybe upwards of 2 or 3 professors, you could see yourself working for them. Now, at this time, a number of schools will have recruiting weekends to their accepted candidates, so you might find yourself flown out to some of these places. So I'd say before you arrange a visit, or if you're thinking of arranging a visit, contact their graduate coordinator to ease that transition, because they might say, whoa, hold the brakes, we're going to invite you anyway. So that is always nice when they do that. And I know of a bunch of schools that do. They try to sell the school on you as well. So, yeah, I mentioned evaluating the professor. Oh, right. So when you're evaluating the professors, make sure that you're evaluating them as potential advisors to you. And really, there's a lot of criteria that can go into a good advisor, but it needs to be a productive relationship where you are able to communicate well with each other, and their leadership style matches your mentorship style, so to speak. So, let's say if you're a person that really likes to be left alone and to their own devices to really work on the problem and get help when you need it, if you're more independently minded that way, then you probably wouldn't go along very well with a very hands-on professor. But I mean, if you're like me and you actually prefer a hands-on professor, then that could be a more beneficial relationship. You'll also have to answer the question on whether or not you want a more established professor or older advisor versus one who is younger, and there might be an assistant professor still trying to get tenure. There's pros and cons of each situation, but big things you want to look out for is the reliability of their funding, where their students are going after they graduate, and what other students in their group are saying about the group. Their professor will obviously have their own opinions, but the best feedback you're going to get are going to be from current group members when the professor is not there. So make sure you're able to speak with them. Otherwise, be open to the possibilities. When it comes to choosing research advisors after the whole acceptance thing is done, you may not be accepted to the group that you want to work for, and that's totally okay. There's a lot that's not in your control, and whether or not someone's going to choose you over another person obviously is not. So be open to the possibilities, and if you wind up on a project that wasn't your first pick, that's okay. It happens to a lot of people. I personally got my 3rd pick in graduate school, so it can surprise you. Be open to it. Learn the experiences that are good to learn. Worst case scenario, if it's something you absolutely hate, you can get your master's degree in that group and switch to another group or move to another university. That typically takes about a year off your graduation time, so I'd use that cautiously. So after all this is said and done, and you've done all your visits and you've really narrowed it down and decided which one you want to attend, you need to accept, I think the deadline for most of these schools is by mid-April, I think April 15th. And I think that's true for undergraduate as well as grad school. I would highly, highly urge you not to accept a position, a graduate school appointment, if they are not offering funding. For STEM programs in general, your funding comes from the research grants, and there isn't a reason why the professor wouldn't have full funding for a project that they're actively recruiting. If they accept you and say, well, we'll put you on department funding and you have to help write the grants, I'd really reconsider joining something like that. Or if the school accepts you on the condition that you're applying for, say, first-year NSF grants, I would take a hard pass on that as well. You definitely want to go with groups that have established funding and that don't require extra work of you at the beginning. That's a lot of stress, and if you're writing proposals, you're not doing lab work, obviously. And this is something that's better saved for the professor or a postdoc. So once you've accepted, that's awesome. You'll work out when the move-in dates are. You typically move in mid to late summer, so late July, early August, unless they want you there earlier for lab rotations or something like that. And then you'll choose a project and an advisor within your first year. You might, as I said before, do lab rotations, and you work with several different labs, and then there's a mutual decision on both ends. Where I went for grad school, we had to meet with individual advisors for at least 30 minutes and speak with them. They give us a lot of material to read. We can meet with their groups, and then we would give priority orders and in terms of like 1 to 4, and then advisors would get together in a big meeting, and basically it's the NBA draft of grad students. Every school has their own way that they do this, so you'll become familiar with that process. But you'll have your project by the first year. And as I mentioned before in the networking video, once you feel more comfortable and established in this role, and you're doing that work-life balance that I mentioned in the very first video, because, oh, believe me, in that first year it's super important. Once you have all that under control, you can add back in the networking. The sooner you can do that, the better, obviously, especially if you're going to be in school for a while, and the job search won't be for a while. This is a great time to get to know people around you. And yeah, also in terms of networking, you'll also be attending meetings. You'll probably be attending a lot more conferences, especially as you get into like a late second year, third year. Once you have actual results to show, you will be probably attending more of those. I think most students will attend at least 2 conferences, some maybe more, some maybe less. Actually, I don't think maybe less. I attended 2 personally. I don't know anyone who attended just 1. I know some that attended upwards of 7 or 8, but I think 1 conference a year from your 3rd year onward is a good number. Okay, so at this point I'm rambling. I think that's all you really need to know for the grad school process at this point. But yeah, speak with a bunch of people about this. You'll get a number of different takes on it. Yeah, good luck. Good luck with the applications if that's what you're doing. But if you start getting into this process and you decide, you know what, maybe I'll just try industry for a couple of years, that's okay too. You might have to retake the GRE, and you'll be a couple years out when you ask your professors for recommendations, but it's not the biggest deal.